Have you ever noticed how a river creates the deepest channels in places where it meets the softest soil? So too do manipulative personalities carve their deepest wounds in those whose kindness flows most freely. Each time you abandon your boundaries for another smile of approval, each moment you shrink yourself to avoid another's displeasure, you surrender a small piece of your essence. This quiet erosion happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you find yourself standing in the hollow space where your authentic self once lived, a stranger in the landscape of your own life, wondering how the path of perpetual niceness led you so far from home. If this resonates with the quiet whisper in your heart, I invite you to stay with me through this journey of reclamation. Your presence here is already the first brave step toward wholeness. The greatest battle we face is not against others, but against the illusion that peace comes from avoiding conflict. There exists a particular pain, known only to those who have learned to dissolve their boundaries in the acid of others' expectations. This pain often begins innocently enough, with the desire to be kind, to be helpful, to be valued. Yet when this natural human impulse meets the gravitational pull of a narcissistic personality, something dangerous occurs. Consider how Mia, a talented marketing specialist, found herself staying late every Thursday to finish presentations her charismatic colleague David had promised, but never completed. "I'm just better at the details," he would say with a disarming smile, "and clients love you." The flattery felt good at first, a small price for his friendship and professional alliance, but weeks became months, and David's requests expanded like gas filling available space. Soon Mia was answering his calls on weekends, editing his reports, even covering for his absences with elaborate explanations to their manager. What Mia didn't realize was that her kindness had become currency in a transaction where only she was paying. Each time she said yes to what should have been a clear no, she reinforced an unspoken contract. Her worth existed only in her usefulness to others. Meanwhile, David's behavior revealed the narcissist's playbook. Find someone whose self-worth is tied to being needed, exploit their desire for approval, then extract value while offering little in return. The narcissistic relationship operates on a fundamental imbalance that appears paradoxically as balance. You give, they take. You accommodate, they expand. You apologize, they accept without reciprocation. This pattern feels familiar because it follows the comfortable grooves of how many of us were taught to behave. Be nice, avoid conflict, put others first. The narcissist simply exploits this programming. Have you noticed this pattern in your own life? Perhaps with a parent who was never satisfied unless you abandoned your needs for theirs, or with a romantic partner whose happiness seemed to require your perpetual accommodation, or even with a friend whose crises always trump your boundaries. The seduction lies in how natural it feels to give more than you receive, how it aligns with values you cherish like compassion and generosity. Yet true compassion never requires self-erasure. True generosity never leaves you hollow. What makes this dynamic so insidious is how it masquerades as virtue. Society celebrates those who give without limit, who never say no, who put everyone else first. We idolize the martyrs of niceness, while failing to see the slow-motion sacrifice of their authentic selves. The truth is that perpetual niceness is not kindness but fear dressed in benevolent clothing. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as selfish. And narcissists instinctively recognize this fear. They sense it like sharks detect blood in water, and they move toward it with purpose. This is why the first step in reclaiming your power requires honest self-reflection. Ask yourself, do I say yes when I want to say no? Do I apologize for taking up space? Do my relationships feel balanced or perpetually tilted toward others' needs? The answers may be uncomfortable, but clarity is the foundation of change. The cost of this imbalance manifests physically and emotionally. The body keeps the ledger of all you've given and all you've withheld from yourself. It appears as chronic fatigue that sleep doesn't remedy, as anxiety that buzzes through your nervous system like electricity seeking ground, as resentment that leaks into other relationships like a toxin. You might recognize these symptoms in yourself. The exhaustion that feels bone deep, the irritability that seems to have no specific cause, the sense of playing a role rather than living authentically. These are not character flaws, but warning signals from a self fighting for survival. And yet, despite this toll, breaking free feels frighteningly difficult. The narcissist has likely convinced you that your worth exists only in relation to them, that without your sacrifice you offer little of value. They've enrolled you in a false narrative where your strength threatens rather than enhances the relationship. This is the invisible cage of niceness, where bars made of others' expectations and your own fear hold you more securely than any physical restraint ever could. Your body speaks truth, even when your words still cling to comfortable lies. The journey toward reclaiming your power begins not with dramatic confrontation, but with silent recognition, learning to read the signals your body has been sending while your mind was busy constructing justifications for your discomfort. Have you noticed the subtle tightening in your chest when that certain person calls? The way your shoulders climb toward your ears during conversations, where you're performing niceness rather than expressing authenticity. The mysterious headaches that arrive before family gatherings, where your boundaries will be trampled like grass under careless feet. These physical responses are not random malfunctions, but messages from a wisdom deeper than conscious thought. They are your body's rebellion against the theft of your energy, your time, your very essence. Consider how Mia's body tried to alert her long before her mind acknowledged the problem. Sunday evenings brought mysterious stomach pain. Precisely. When David typically texted about work he hadn't completed, her sleep grew fragmented, especially after days when she'd abandoned her own projects to rescue his. Even her posture changed, shoulders rounded forward as if perpetually bracing for the next request, the next demand, the next emotional extraction. This bodily intelligence operates with a simple truth. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. When you consistently give more than you receive, this imbalance must manifest somewhere. The body, being the honest ledger keeper it is, records every energetic debt. The narcissist's presence in your life creates a particular pattern of depletion. Unlike balanced relationships that leave you feeling replenished even after giving, interactions with narcissistic personalities create an energy vacuum. You may enter such encounters feeling centered and leave feeling fragmented, as if vital parts of yourself were extracted during the exchange. This energetic taxation appears in consistent patterns. After interactions with narcissistic individuals, you might experience a sudden, inexplicable fatigue that feels different from normal tiredness, as if your very life force has been diminished, rather than just your physical energy. A foggy mental state where decision-making becomes unreasonably difficult, even about simple matters. A sense of emotional numbness or disconnection, as if a protective system has activated to prevent further drainage. These responses signal that your nervous system recognizes a threat your conscious mind may still rationalize away. Your body intuitively understands what psychology confirms. Narcissistic relationships operate on extraction rather than exchange. Understanding this pattern allows you to use your physical responses as a guidance system. Rather than dismissing your discomfort as weakness or oversensitivity, labels narcissists often apply to those who resist their influence, you can honor these signals as valuable intelligence. Begin by creating small pauses throughout your day. Moments where you check in with your physical state. How is your breathing, shallow or deep? Where does tension reside in your body? What happens to this tension when you think of specific people in your life? This practice of embodied awareness creates space between stimulus and response, between the narcissist's request and your automatic yes. In this space lives the possibility of choice, the first fragile seedling of reclaimed power. The body's wisdom extends beyond warning signals to offer guidance toward healing. Just as it clearly indicates when boundaries are violated, it provides feedback when boundaries are properly established. After setting a healthy limit, you might notice your breathing deepens naturally. Your shoulders may drop away from your ears. Digestive issues that seem chronic might mysteriously improve. This is your physical system confirming what your conditioning might still question. Boundaries are Not selfish, but necessary for well-being, yours and ultimately others. A boundary is not a wall built from fear, but a threshold established in love. Love for yourself first, then others. The concept of boundaries often triggers resistance in those conditioned to be perpetually nice. The very word can feel harsh, conjuring images of coldness or rejection. Yet true boundaries are not weapons, but instruments of clarity. They define where you end and others begin, creating the necessary space for authentic connection rather than enmeshed codependence. For Mia, the turning point came unexpectedly. After 3 years of accommodating David's expanding demands, she found herself staring at her phone one Sunday evening, her stomach clenched in familiar dread as his name appeared on the screen. David needed her to complete a presentation he'd promised their biggest client by tomorrow morning. The request was unreasonable, impossible even, yet her finger hovered over the green accept button as it had countless times before. But something had shifted. Perhaps it was the accumulation of sleepless nights, or the projects of her own perpetually sacrificed on the altar of his emergencies. Perhaps it was the realization that despite her constant support, David had taken credit for her work in last week's meeting. Whatever the catalyst in that moment, Mia did something revolutionary in its simplicity. She honored her own limits. "I'm sorry, I can't help with this one," she told him, her voice shakier than she'd have liked but present with newfound resonance. "You'll need to handle it yourself or request an extension." His response came swiftly, wrapped in familiar manipulation, disappointment, subtle accusation, reminders of all he'd supposedly done for her. The emotional arsenal once guaranteed to collapse her resistance. But something had fundamentally changed in Mia's relationship with herself. The discomfort of his disapproval, while still present, felt less threatening than the certainty of betraying her own needs once again. This single no became the first stone in a foundation of self-respect that would ultimately transform every relationship in her life. Establishing boundaries with narcissistic personalities requires understanding that your resistance will be met with predictable counterforces. The initial response often includes some combination of disbelief, as if your boundary violates, some natural law of your relationship manipulation, attempts to make you question your own judgment or fairness, escalation, increasing the emotional stakes to overwhelm your resolve. Recognizing these responses as tactical rather than truthful helps maintain your center when the inevitable pushback comes. The narcissist's reaction is not evidence that your boundary is wrong, but confirmation that it is necessary. The practical implementation of boundaries begins with internal clarity before external expression. Before articulating limits to others, you must first establish them within yourself. This requires honest assessment of what behaviors you can and cannot sustain without self-betrayal. Ask yourself, what interactions leave me feeling depleted rather than energized? Where do I consistently override my own needs to accommodate others? What would respect for my time, energy, and values actually look like in practice? Once this internal foundation is established, external communication becomes possible. Effective boundary setting with narcissistic personalities requires simplicity and consistency. Complex explanations create openings for debate or manipulation. "No, that doesn't work for me," delivers clarity a 10-minute justification cannot. The implementation may feel uncomfortable at first, like exercising an atrophied muscle. You may experience guilt, anxiety, or fear of abandonment, emotional responses conditioned by both your history and societal expectations, particularly for women, who often face greater pressure to be accommodating at any cost. Yet with each boundary honored, each limit maintained, your emotional immune system strengthens. The initial discomfort gives way to increasing ease as you discover a fundamental truth. Respect from others begins with respect for yourself. For Mia, that first boundary with David created a ripple effect. His initial reaction was precisely as predictable as a script. First disbelief, then anger, finally attempts to enlist colleagues in portraying her as difficult. Yet something unexpected also occurred. Several team members privately expressed admiration for her stance. More significantly, her relationship with herself transformed. Projects long delayed found completion. Sleep improved. The chronic stomach pain that had become her Sunday companion gradually faded. This transformation extended beyond her professional life. The confidence cultivated through this single reclamation of power illuminated other relationships where similar patterns had taken root. The friend whose crises always superseded her needs. The family members whose expectations had shaped her choices for decades. Each boundary established became another step toward wholeness. The most powerful, yes you will ever speak, is the one that follows 1,000 no's to what diminishes your spirit. Learning to say no without guilt represents perhaps the most practical yet profound aspect of reclaiming your power from narcissistic influence. This seemingly simple verbal boundary becomes revolutionary when you understand what it actually represents. Not rejection of others, but protection of what is sacred within yourself. The difficulty in saying no often stems from fundamental misunderstandings about what the word actually means in practice. When you say no to a request that violates your boundaries, you're not saying, "I don't care about you." Your needs are unimportant. "I am selfish." You are simply saying, "I honor the limits of my energy and time. I respect myself enough to maintain balance. I choose authenticity over approval." This reframing transforms no from a weapon into a tool, one that carves space for your authentic presence in relationships rather than your perpetual accommodation. For Mia, developing this practice required starting small. She began with low-stakes situations, declining an invitation to a social event she had no desire to attend, ordering what she actually wanted at lunch rather than deferring to others' preferences. Each minor no strengthened her capacity for the more significant boundaries she would need to establish. With David, her practice evolved from complete capitulation to graduated resistance. Instead of accepting impossible deadlines, she began offering realistic alternatives. "I can't complete this by tomorrow morning, but I could have it ready by Wednesday afternoon." Rather than assuming responsibility for his unfinished work, she reflected ownership back to its source. "I understand this is urgent. How do you plan to approach it?" These responses might seem modest, even inadequate against the force of a narcissistic personality. Yet they represent profound shifts in the underlying dynamic, from automatic yes to conscious choice, from self-abandonment to self-respect. The practice of authentic no requires understanding that the discomfort you feel when setting boundaries is temporary, while the damage of perpetual accommodation is cumulative. The narcissist counts on your avoidance of short-term discomfort to secure your long-term compliance. Breaking this pattern means willingly experiencing the temporary unpleasantness of their disappointment, anger, or manipulation tactics, rather than the permanent erosion of your autonomy. This practice develops through consistent reinforcement. Begin by noticing the physical sensations that arise when you contemplate saying no. The tightness in your throat, the accelerated heartbeat, the contracted stomach. These are not warnings to retreat, but indicators that you're approaching important territory. Practice simple, direct language that states your position without excessive explanation or apology. "I won't be able to take that on," delivers with clarity what 20 apologetic sentences cannot. Prepare for pushback rather than being surprised by it. The narcissist's initial response to your boundary is rarely their final position. Holding steady through their first, second, and even third attempts at breaching your limit is often necessary before they adjust to the new reality. As your capacity for authentic no develops, you may notice interesting shifts in your relationships. Some connections will naturally fall away, those based primarily on your accommodation rather than mutual respect. Others may transform as clearer boundaries create space for more genuine interaction. Most importantly, your relationship with yourself will evolve from fragmented compliance to integrated wholeness. For Mia, the journey from perpetual niceness to authentic presence unfolded gradually. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, when the gravitational pull of approval-seeking overcame her newfound resolve. Yet even these apparent failures contained valuable information, highlighting areas where her boundaries remained vulnerable and her self-worth still tied to external validation. The practice of authentic no eventually extended beyond David to transform her entire approach to relationships. She discovered that contrary to her deepest fears, setting limits didn't diminish connection but enhanced it. People who valued her for her authentic presence rather than her usefulness remained, and even drew closer. Those who had been extracting more than they reciprocated either adjusted their expectations or naturally drifted away. Most surprisingly, she found that the clearer her no became, the more meaningful her yes could be. When agreement came from choice rather than compulsion, her contributions carried an energy and integrity previously impossible. The yes that follows conscious no contains power that automatic compliance never will. The people surrounding you are either mirrors reflecting your truth or masks concealing it. Choose carefully which you invite into your sacred space. As you reclaim your power from narcissistic influence, you'll discover that boundaries extend beyond individual interactions to encompass your entire social ecosystem. The company you keep either reinforces your journey toward authenticity or subtly undermines it. Creating a circle of resonance, relationships that reflect and amplify your true nature rather than diminish it, becomes essential to sustaining your transformation. For Mia, this dimension of her journey revealed itself gradually. As her boundaries with David strengthened, she became increasingly aware of similar dynamics in other relationships. The friend who called only during crises but disappeared when Mia needed support. The family members whose approval remained perpetually contingent on her compliance. The social circle that subtly penalized assertiveness while rewarding self-sacrifice. This recognition brought both clarity and grief, understanding that reclaiming her power might mean releasing connections long considered fundamental to her identity. Yet alongside this loss emerged unexpected discovery. As space cleared in her life, new relationships appeared with surprising synchronicity. A colleague who admired her boundary with David invited her to a professional development group where mutual support replaced competitive extraction. A new friendship developed with someone who respected her no as readily as her yes. Even some existing relationships transformed as clearer boundaries created foundation for more authentic connection. Building a supportive circle requires intentional curation of your social environment. This doesn't necessarily mean dramatic confrontations or wholesale rejection of existing relationships, but rather a gradual, conscious shift in where and with whom you invest your energy. Begin by observing the energetic quality of your interactions. After spending time with someone, do you feel energized or depleted, seen or evaluated, accepted as you are or pressured to perform? These questions help identify which relationships nourish your authentic self and which subtly require your contraction to maintain connection. Next, consider expanding your circle to include relationships that specifically support your evolving boundaries. This might mean seeking mentorship from those further along the path of authentic living. It could involve joining communities organized around principles of mutual respect and reciprocity. It might simply mean deepening connections with those who already demonstrate healthy boundaries in their own lives. The quality of resonance in relationships operates at frequencies beyond conscious awareness. We absorb the unspoken expectations, values and permissions of those we spend time with, often without realizing their influence. Surrounding yourself with people who prioritize authenticity over approval, who value self-respect alongside compassion for others, creates an environment where your own transformation is supported rather than undermined. For Mia, one particularly powerful addition to her circle came unexpectedly. During a professional conference, she met Elena, a senior executive whose presence carried remarkable clarity. In their conversations, Mia noticed how Elena listened fully without rushing to accommodate, how she declined commitments that didn't align with her priorities without extensive justification, how she extended genuine warmth without compromising her boundaries. This living example of integrated strength and openness provided something theoretical knowledge alone couldn't: a template for embodied authenticity. Through observation and occasional direct guidance, Mia absorbed new possibilities for how she might move through the world, respected rather than merely accommodated, valued for her essence rather than just her usefulness. As your circle of resonance develops, you'll likely notice interesting ripple effects. The standards you accept for yourself subtly influence what others believe possible for themselves. Your boundaries become silent permission for others to honor their own limits. Your authentic presence creates space for those around you to drop their own performances. This community dimension of transformation highlights an important truth. Reclaiming your power from narcissistic influence is both deeply personal and inherently relational. While the core work occurs within your relationship with yourself, its expression and reinforcement happen in connection with others. The ultimate measure of your supportive circle isn't agreement or comfort, but whether these relationships call you toward your highest expression rather than your smallest accommodation. True supporters celebrate your boundaries not despite their occasional inconvenience, but because they recognize how essential these limits are to your wholeness. The most revolutionary act in a world that profits from your self-doubt is to value yourself beyond measure. At the foundation of all boundary setting, all authentic expression, all reclamation of power lies a radical proposition that you are inherently worthy of respect, care, and regard, not for what you provide others, but simply because you exist. This understanding, when fully embraced, transforms your approach to relationships from perpetual earning to natural embodiment of your intrinsic value. Self-love remains perhaps the most misunderstood concept in personal development, often confused with narcissistic self-absorption or superficial self-indulgence. True self-love operates at a more fundamental level. It is the recognition and honoring of your inherent worthiness, the commitment to treating yourself with the same care you would offer a beloved friend. For Mia, this dimension of her journey proved both the most challenging and the most transformative. Having built her identity around being needed by others, she initially struggled to value herself independent of her usefulness. What remained when she wasn't solving David's problems, or accommodating her friends' expectations, or fulfilling her family's unspoken demands? The answer emerged gradually through intentional practices that cultivated presence with herself. She began with simple acts of self-care, ensuring adequate rest, nourishing food, movement that honored her body's needs. These basic attentions, while seemingly minor, represented significant departures from her pattern of placing herself last. As physical self-care became more natural, she expanded to emotional and spiritual dimensions. She developed a daily practice of self-reflection, asking, "What do I actually want today? What feels authentic rather than performative? Where am I? Still abandoning myself to secure external approval?" These inquiries led to uncomfortable recognitions. How often her choices still reflected conditioned responses rather than genuine desire. How readily she still abandoned her own truth when faced with potential disapproval. Yet each recognition created opportunity for new choice, for reclaiming another fragment of her authentic self. The practice of self-love requires understanding that your worthiness exists independent of external validation. This doesn't mean disregarding others' perspectives entirely, but rather placing them in appropriate context as data points rather than defining judgments. When someone's opinion of you becomes the primary determinant of your self-perception, you've surrendered your power to an external authority who cannot possibly know your complete truth. Cultivating self-love involves consistent reinforcement of your inherent value through both thought and action. Speak to yourself with the same compassion you would offer a dear friend facing challenge or setback. Notice how your internal dialogue often employs harshness you would never direct toward others. Make decisions based on alignment with your values rather than anticipated approval. Ask, does this choice reflect who I truly am or who I believe others want me to be? Practice receiving as willingly as you give. Notice the discomfort that arises when someone offers care without expectation of return, and gradually expand your capacity to accept this as natural rather than suspicious. For Mia, one particularly powerful practice involved regular periods of solitude, not as punishment or deprivation, but as opportunity to hear her own voice without interference. In these quiet spaces, she rediscovered aspects of herself long abandoned for acceptance: her love of painting, her preference for small gatherings over large events, her need for periods of reflection between social engagements. As her self-knowledge deepened, her discernment in relationships naturally sharpened. She became increasingly sensitive to the subtle cues that signaled genuine connection versus potential exploitation. The desperate need for approval that had made her vulnerable to narcissistic manipulation gradually transformed into clear-eyed assessment of relational health. David eventually left the company after his performance problems became impossible to conceal behind others' efforts. While Mia felt momentary guilt at no longer protecting him from the consequences of his choices, she recognized this as the echo of outdated conditioning rather than genuine responsibility. More significantly, she discovered that her worth at work had never depended on her association with him. Her genuine talents, her attention to detail, her creative problem-solving, her ability to build authentic client relationships received greater recognition as she stopped diminishing herself to accommodate his fragile ego. The journey towards self-love is not linear but cyclical. Periods of clear-eyed self-respect, followed by moments of regression into familiar patterns. Each cycle, however, strengthens the foundation of your authentic worth, making return to self-abandonment increasingly difficult to sustain. The ultimate expression of self-love appears not in dramatic declarations, but in quiet certainty, the unshakable knowledge that your worthiness requires no external confirmation. From this center, you can extend genuine care to others without self-erasure, set boundaries without apology, and offer your gifts from wholeness rather than depletion. As you continue this journey of reclaiming your power from narcissistic influence, consider these questions as signposts for further exploration. Where in your body do you feel the tension between authentic expression and habitual accommodation? What physical sensations arise when you contemplate setting a boundary with someone who typically expects your compliance? What stories do you tell yourself about what would happen if you prioritized your well-being over others' expectations? How many of these stories are actually predictions based on past experience rather than present reality? Who in your life consistently demonstrates respect for your boundaries? How might deepening these connections create counterbalance to relationships that demand your contraction? What would become possible in your life if you directed even a fraction of the energy you spend accommodating others toward nurturing your own aspirations? What dreams have you deferred while helping others achieve theirs? When you imagine your future self looking back on this period of your life, what choices would make that future self proud? What boundaries would they wish you had established sooner? These inquiries serve not as exercises in self-judgment, but as invitations to expanded awareness, each question opening another door to your authentic expression and empowered presence. The journey from perpetual niceness to authentic power represents not rejection of kindness, but elevation of its expression, from automated response to conscious choice, from self-abandonment to integrated compassion that includes your own well-being alongside others. As you continue this path, remember that transformation occurs not in dramatic leaps, but in consistent choices that gradually redirect the current of your life. Each boundary honored, each authentic no expressed, each moment of self-care prioritized creates another thread in the fabric of your reclaimed power. The world needs your authentic presence more than your perpetual accommodation. Your unique gifts emerge not from contorting yourself to fit others' expectations, but from honoring the truth of who you genuinely are. This is not selfishness, but contribution of the highest order, offering what only you in your distinctive wholeness can provide. If this message resonates with something long buried within you, consider sharing it with others who might benefit from permission to reclaim their own power. The ripples of your authentic living extend far beyond what you can currently imagine, touching lives through channels both visible and unseen. See you next time. Keep your eyes open, your mind curious, and your spirit evolving.